You ever have that feeling you study for hours, you really put the work in, and then the next day, poof, it's just gone? Yeah, we've all been there. So in this explainer, we're going to ditch the common myths and dive into the real science of how we actually learn and remember things. We're talking about how to become an architect of your own knowledge. Ready? Let's do this. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that frustrating forgetting problem. Then we'll peek under the hood at how your memory actually works. From there, we'll get practical with an active learning toolkit, figure out why when you study is so important, learn how to set the stage for success, and finally, we'll talk about a big mindset shift to become a better learner overall. All right, let's start with something we all know way too well, the leaky bucket. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You spend hours pouring all this knowledge in, rereading, highlighting, cramming like crazy, and it feels like it just leaks right back out. It's incredibly frustrating, but here's the good news. It doesn't have to be that way. This really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Why is it you can remember some random fact from years ago, but forget what you studied for a test yesterday? Is it all just random? Well, spoiler alert, nope, not at all. Cognitive science shows us it's not about how much you study, but how you study that makes all the difference. And this is really where the rubber meets the road. On the left, you've got your passive studying habits. These are the things that feel productive, right? Rereading your notes, highlighting everything, pulling an all-nighter. But honestly, they're super inefficient. On the right, that's where the magic is. Active learning. This is about wrestling with the material, forcing your brain to recall it, trying to explain it, and spacing it all out. That is where real, sticky learning happens. Okay, so if we're going to be active learners, we kind of need to know what we're working with. What's actually going on in our brains when we build a memory? Let's pull back the curtain. It's not magic, it's just some really fascinating biology. It really boils down to three main stages. First, there's encoding. That's your brain taking in new information and trying to make sense of it. Then you've got storage, which is, holding on to it. And finally, and this one is so important, you have retrieval. That's the act of actually pulling that information back out when you need it. The best learning strategies target all three. I absolutely love this metaphor. Think of it this way. Knowledge is like mental Velcro. The more stuff you already know, the more little hooks you have for new information to grab onto and stick. It's why building a solid foundation of knowledge is just so critical for future learning. All right, enough theory. We've got the blueprint, now it's time to open up the toolbox. These are the practical, science-backed strategies you can start using today to build stronger, longer-lasting memories. So the first and, frankly, most powerful tool in our kit is retrieval practice. This isn't just glancing at your notes again. This is the simple, but challenging act of closing the book, looking away from the screen, and forcing your brain to ask, okay, what do I actually remember? That little bit of struggle, that effort to pull the information out, that is precisely what strengthens the memory. And putting this into action is super straightforward. We're talking about simple things like using flashcards or taking quick, low-stakes quizzes. Remember, the point isn't the grade, it's the act of recalling. You can even just start a study session by grabbing a blank page and writing down everything you remember from last time. Or try the two things prompt. What were the two main takeaways? Easy. Our next tool is self-explanation. See, it's one thing to memorize a fact, but it's a whole other thing to truly understand it. This is where you force yourself to connect the dots by asking those simple but powerful questions. How does this work? And why is this true? You can do this by just trying to explain a concept out loud in your own words, or try to teach it to a friend. That's a classic for a reason. It forces you to clarify your own thinking. When you're doing practice questions, don't just find the right answer. Explain to yourself why it's right, and even better, why the other options are wrong. That's a game changer. Okay, so we've got our what and our how, but to really lock this stuff in, the when is just as critical. Seriously, the timing of your studying can make a massive, massive difference. And that brings us to spaced practice. This is the complete opposite of cramming. Instead of one monster all-night study binge, you spread your learning out over several shorter sessions. This little change forces your brain to work just a little bit harder to recall the information each time, and that effort is what makes the memory so much stronger. Here's a great way to think about it. Your brain has a cognitive battery. Cramming just drains that battery all the way down to zero. You get exhausted, you can't focus, and nothing new sticks. But spacing out your practice,
That lets your battery recharge between sessions, so you're actually fresh and effective each time you sit down to learn.
Let's make this really concrete. Look at these two schedules. The cramming schedule is that one giant 4-hour session right before the exam. The space schedule takes that same amount of time, 4 hours, but breaks it into smaller, focused chunks over a few days. It's the same time commitment, but I guarantee you the person who spaced it out is going to remember way more for way longer.
So we've covered all these awesome techniques, but here's the thing, they don't happen in a vacuum. Just like a house needs a solid foundation, our brains need the right kind of environment to learn effectively. So let's talk about how to set that stage.
And get this, the brain's #1 priority isn't learning, it's safety. Your brain's primary job above all else is to keep you safe. Only when it feels safe and secure can it switch gears into learning mode. So creating an emotionally safe climate is the absolute bedrock for everything else.
The physical space you're in matters a ton too. I mean, think about your own study area. Does it feel like a place you can focus? Things like aesthetics, clutter, how the furniture is arranged, it all has an impact. And our brains love novelty. So even something as simple as changing the posters on the wall can tap into that and keep things fresh.
Okay, we've covered the tools, the timing, and the environment. Now for the final piece of the puzzle, and it might be the most important one, a fundamental shift in how we think about what learning is even supposed to feel like.
Here is the big secret. Effective learning is supposed to feel hard. I know, that sounds wrong, but it's true. Researchers have this fantastic term for it, desirable difficulties. All those strategies we talked about, like retrieval and spacing, they feel slower and more frustrating in the moment. But that effort is exactly what forges deep, lasting knowledge. Let me say it again. If learning feels easy, it's probably not working.
So ultimately, the goal is to shift from being a passive student, someone who just lets information wash over them, to becoming an active architect of knowledge. You're the one in charge, deliberately constructing a mental framework that's strong, organized, and truly built to last. So as we wrap this up, I'll leave you with a question to chew on. Which desirable difficulty will you embrace first? Maybe it's making some flashcards. Maybe it's spacing out your next study session. The choice is yours, and the power to build a better mind is right there in your hands.